So, um, as I said, we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Theresa Murphy. I am the PhD advisor here at the Office of Graduate Career Development. So I currently do both academic and industry preparation for our PhD students, and then also some of our master's students. Um, Today, we will be talking a little bit about some of the things that our office does. I will give you that overview of the academic job market, and then we will talk a little bit more in depth about some of these career documents that you would need going into academia. So as I said, my name is Theresa Murphy. I am a second year PhD student in the Higher Adult and Lifelong Education program. I have previous experience working in faculty services and with international students. So I've got a breadth of experience across higher education. I am the PhD slash graduate career advisor. This is my second year in this role. I have taken a lot of time to educate myself on all of the academic documents that you would need when going into the job market. I have talked with faculty members across campus. I have continued to stay up to date on all of the trends. So everything that I'm sharing with you is general best practices for going into the academic job market. For everything that I share, I do always encourage people to simultaneously build a support network using our services, using your faculty advisor or PI, and then also anyone else in the university or in your life who you think would be able to provide valuable support and feedback. So I'm going to go ahead and just get started on our office's resources. The Office of Graduate Career Development here on MSU's campus is dedicated to master's, PhD, and then other professional students, and really is solely focused on your career development, whether you want to go into industry positions or into academia. We provide career workshops like this one. We provide one-on-one advising appointments, and we will do anything to support your career or professional development journey from, I don't know what I'm doing with my life. Can we just kind of start to talk about it, to some job search strategies, to helping you build or edit these career documents, all the way up to once you get an offer, helping with negotiation and things like that. So I would strongly encourage you to utilize those services. We provide those services to students up until 2 years after graduation. And if you come to us after that, we'll try and find the best resources for you here on campus. We also have resources that we subscribe to, things like Beyond the Professoriate, or the master's version, Beyond Grad School. This is an online platform that has a video library for people who have gone through the whole job search process. They've got tools, they've got small courses for you. Our office is a small office. It only has 3 people. And so some of the Beyond the Professoriate workshops or webinars just have a little bit more information. They have a larger capacity to build out some of these experiences that you might have and responses or resources for that. We have a lot more of our resources listed on the graduate school website, and then we partner very closely with the rest of the career service network on MSU's campus, and they have a lot of really, really helpful resources on that website that, although primarily geared towards undergrads, I still find myself pulling out in pretty much every PhD advising session I have. So let's just go ahead and jump into this idea of the academic job market. Less than a quarter of STEM PhD students end up as tenure track professors. Most people, up until very, very recently, were coming into academia with the express purpose of going into the faculty route, ideally trying to be tenure track professors. We have, in the last few decades, shifted away from tenure track as the ultimate goal for a lot of people, but it still very much is the goal for many people who are entering into their PhD programs. And so, although this last year was the first year that more people are actively pursuing first step jobs outside of academia after their PhDs, this is still a very real goal for a lot of people who come in, and it is not an impossible goal. There are very much steps that you can start to take no matter where you're at on your PhD journey, or even if you're a pre-PhD student intending to come in pretty soon. And it really does start day one. But if you are getting towards the end, you feel like you maybe haven't done enough, that is totally okay. Everybody has their own path. And we just want to make sure that you're here now. You have the opportunity to start to set yourself up for success. So before we go ahead and jump in, can I just get a quick response in the chat of what year is everyone within their PhD experiences? Okay, so I have someone who is 3.5. That's awesome. I think that's a really good place to be. We've got someone year one, really trying to get started early. That's awesome. Do we have anyone who is really, really late in their experiences? Got another third year. Okay, awesome. So that's wonderful. We've got a postdoc too. I love that we've got some people here with postdoc experiences. We do here at MSU have a specific postdoc office. And so before we leave today, if you have not already connected with that postdoc office, I would encourage you to stay for a second after. I can make sure I get you that information as well, because as I said, it's really going to be a kind of, instead of specific mentor, a kind of mentorship experience where you find different people who can serve different aspects of the experience for you. So keeping track of what you've done is really important for this experience. If you are here, like some of us are from year one, I think that you are in a perfect place to be able to start keeping track of what you've done. If you are a year 3.5, 5 postdoc, you probably have experienced this already, where you come in and pretty much from day one, you are starting to build up your CV or curricula vitae. So that's going to be something that your professors really encourage you to do. That's going to be kind of the starting place for all of the rest of the things that we need to do, and is often the place that people come in to meet with me and feel the most prepared. So I've got a little bit of a timeline here that I have broken down based on the meetings that I have had over the last 2 years, based on trends that I saw when working in a business school and supporting faculty recruiting, and then also with the information that I've seen and researched online. And I want to make sure we've got the asterisks in here of this is a suggested timeline. If you are not exactly on this timeline, you are still totally okay. Everybody experiences different things during their PhD. You may have different focuses. So if you didn't do the stuff on day one and you're farther down on your timeline, that is still totally okay. I also want to make sure we're looking at this as, what I intended, a general breakdown of, if you were going to do a 5-ish year PhD, STEM students are very, very strict, typically on the like 5 to 6 year PhDs. Some social sciences, like my program, if you do not get your PhD done in 5 years, that is totally okay. That's very often the norm. So thinking about these will be for a general PhD experience. These are not necessarily exactly how it breaks down for your specific field, and it is not necessarily how it's going to break down for you personally. So at the beginning of our PhD, day one, we want to make sure, if we haven't already, that we've started our CV, started networking, and started gathering experience. That should be pretty easy. A lot of the PhD programs come with a TA or RA position tacked onto it. If it doesn't, a lot of people go out and find GA positions or other experiences that are out there. So if you have done any or all of these at the start of your PhD, that's amazing. You're already on track. If you have not, this is the place where I would encourage you to start, especially if you're early in on your PhD. The CV will just kind of come naturally. It will be required for any article submissions that you do potentially when you're talking about them at conferences. Um, Places like networking are going to be maybe a little bit more of a struggle for some people, especially people who are introverted. But really, just kind of connecting with people when you run into them and making sure that you do not lose track of them as you continue to go throughout your process. You can meet these people at conferences, they can be people in your class, they can be people a couple of years ahead of you. Anyone who you connect with, if you think that they're doing interesting things, stay connected with them and then follow up every so often. Years 1 to 3 are really where we're starting to develop a little bit more of the bulk. We want to make sure that we are keeping our CV updated, attending conferences, lectures, really starting to like network with those specific people in your field, keeping up to date on some of that really interesting new research that's coming out, and kind of figuring out how that might incorporate into the things that you are doing. You also want to start asking yourself the question of whether industry or academia is potentially a path that you can see yourself. A lot of times I will meet with people who are in their 5th year and they suddenly decide midway through their 5th year of their PhD, they're going to graduate in 6 months. They are done with the politics and really do not want to consider academia anymore, but they haven't really given any thought to what else they might do. And that can be a really stressful time when you're finishing up your research, writing up your dissertation, or doing any of those finalization things. And so starting to think in your first couple of years of like, is this an experience that I can see myself wanting to continue to do? Or am I running into places where maybe, I did have a political situation, I'm not 100% sure this is actually the place for me. Just starting to explore those options, be open to things, keep your ear on the ground of what people who have done similar things are doing can be really helpful for then feeling like you're prepared in years 4 and 5 if you decide to completely pivot what you want to do. When you're getting to the end of your PhD, you want to, again, continue to keep your CV updated. As you're starting to look for faculty positions, you are going to start to want to make sure some of your stuff is being published if it hasn't been already. Faculty positions will often require some amounts of publication. And so it can be really helpful to start getting that done. You've been working for 1 to 3 years on your research. And then in these years 4 or 5, as you're working on more of your research, getting your dissertation together, starting to publish that stuff. You also want to start to identify important factors for your job search. Obviously, in this day and age, if we get any amount of feedback, that can feel really, really good. So you might end up applying to every job that you see that sounds vaguely related to what you want to do. But depending on your identities, or your family situations, or any number of other factors, it is still going to be really important to consider some factors to help you narrow down all of the decisions that you're going to make. For me personally, working in higher education, I don't think that I would want to go work in Florida because there's a lot of war against higher education happening within that state, from, all the way from K to 16 and beyond. And everywhere they are not necessarily teaching the things that I personally feel like I would want to teach if I was working in higher education. And so I would probably discount that location as a place that I personally could see myself living in and teaching in. Each person will have different factors. You will have different factors that influence those factors for the job search. And it's going to be important for you to identify based on what your priorities are, what your values are, anything like that, which of those factors are important to kind of limit those faculty jobs that you are applying to. And then depending on field, you will probably need to do a postdoc. Um, and postdocs really are an opportunity for you to focus primarily on building out that research body that you've been working on. It can be very beneficial, particularly for those fields that are super competitive on publishing. If I graduated with 3 to 5 publications when I was in my field, that would be pretty good for me. If I was in a medical field and I didn't have 3 to 5 publications, that would not be necessarily as good or competitive. I may not be within that same level of university that I might want to apply to. So postdocs are really an opportunity to build up that research body, um, explore some of these ideas on your own while you are still continuing to work on those research skills that you've been building, and really just making sure that you are incorporating that kind of goal of being a faculty into that time that you are here as a postdoc. Depending on the field, again, the application timeline for a postdoc might be different than the application timeline for a faculty member. That can be because they hire based on particular needs of the lab. That can also be just kind of based on the funding, or oftentimes postdocs will be created for people to continue on in their lab before they ultimately find their next job. So now I want to move on to the timeline of the application period itself. You are really coming at an opportune time right now, and this workshop was designed to be at this time right now because it gives you plenty of time to start preparing for the application cycle in the fall if you are at that point. So right here, right now, we are doing all of this learning that we would need to do to feel confident in taking the first steps for a fall application. As we move into the next couple of months, the summer, we want to make sure that we are starting on first drafts of our documents. We will go into more depth on those documents towards the end of the presentation. We want to start putting out feelers for our references. If you know who you want to write letters of recommendation for you, it would be a good idea to talk with them now or in the upcoming few months to make sure that when you actually ask them in the fall, it's not a surprise to them. They're not like, oh, actually, I don't think I can speak well of you. And then you're scrambling to find other people. So putting out those feelers, starting to talk to people now is always a really good idea. If it's relevant for your field, it is a good idea to create a personal website where you essentially give descriptions of your research experiences, put your CV there, and then also have the links to your publications. We are moving into a time where CVs incorporate a lot of the links to publications and things like that. But in certain fields, personal websites are still required. When I was supporting faculty members who were hiring for I think it was microeconomics department. Every single person who applied had a personal website. In certain other fields, it will not be quite as important, but it can be a really good way to kind of create a portfolio of all the things that you've done and have that be easily accessible. It also will be a good idea to subscribe to job boards or listservs for faculty jobs in your field. Places like Inside Higher Ed or Higher Ed Jobs have a lot of general resources, and will have a lot of those postings come through. But if you are part of professional memberships, there may be particular job boards or listservs that might have options that are just narrowed down to the specific field you're in. So that I would say those are the next steps that I would encourage you to take if you are planning on entering the job market in the fall, for kind of before the fall. When we start to move into the next semester, late August, early September, that's when the jobs start to open. Usually you'll see them start to open just a little bit after the academic school year starts, but it can kind of be as early as a few days before the academic school year starts if the school that is hiring maybe starts a little bit earlier than us. So when those job postings open, you want to make sure you are confirming with your references that they are willing to write you letters of recommendation. And you also want to start getting feedback on any of your drafts for your documents. So that is why I suggest starting the drafts over the summer. You very much can write all these drafts in mid-August, have them ready to go for someone to look at, and then start applying right away. But it is always a good idea for you to get feedback, and it is always a good idea to get more than one person to edit your documents. I suggest for that having your PI or advisor be the first person you go to, because they are very aware of all of the ideas that you've been working on, all of that research that you've been building over the last couple of years. And they can really be the judge of how well you speak to your research. But they are not going to be necessarily the ones who are hiring you. They very likely are not going to be the ones who are hiring you. And you want to make sure that your research is understandable to more than just the people who have been in your specific lab. So I would strongly suggest, once you start building these drafts, you talk to your PI or advisor, you also come into us. We will do edits of your documents, and our lens will be different from your PI's. We will be looking at it from the lens of someone who does not have that background, and we'll be able to point out places where we might have questions, places where you might need to build things up a little bit. Most people who will be hiring you will have similar backgrounds, but you have been in your field and in the niche project for so long by the time you're ending your PhD that you may assume things are common knowledge. You may use a lot of jargon. You may use terminology that is used within your lab, but may not be used once you step out of your lab, even within the same field. So having someone who is not in your lab, and even someone who is not in your field, look at your document, make sure you're hitting all of the important parts, can ensure that you don't miss anything. So in addition to our office, in addition to your PI, it is always encouraged to have multiple people edit your documents. At the end of the day, you are ultimately the one who is telling your story. You get to make final decisions on everything. You probably will get slightly different feedback from each of the people who reads it, but you just want to make sure that you're getting those different perspectives, because the people who are going to be in the room are only going to have the context that you give them on those pieces of paper. They're not going to be able to make decisions outside of, the things that you tell them, and they are not going to want to make a lot of assumptions on you. So that's where the built out CV comes in. That's where even potentially that personal website comes in, to be able to curate this presentation of yourself and your research that you want those people to see. So then we move on from these job postings opening. These timelines will vary based on school and by discipline a little bit, but I saw the first of the applications last year close in mid to late September, I think. And then I started to see a lot more of those applications closing through early October, mid-October, early November. There were still a couple of people doing applications a little bit later, December, maybe even, but really the bulk of the application period is that early to mid fall. Um, in mid October to November, December, I saw a lot of Zoom interviews happening. And then depending on field, again, either that late fall or early spring. When I was in the economics department, it was early spring for our candidates. Um, there would be flyouts for on-campus interviews and job talks. And then after all of those on-campus interviews and job talks happened, the job offers would go out. And then usually the appointment will begin at the beginning of the university's fiscal year. Typically that's in like July, mid-July, but you can often see those appointments begin anytime between the end of the school year. So like some people, if they start early, are starting in May, to at the very latest, like right before school starts. So this is the general overview timeline of how I would approach the right now to the time when you want to get hired, that last year of applications and finishing up your PhD or postdoc. So keeping in mind both those timelines for the full experience of a PhD student into the application cycle in that what we're going to call the 5th year. We've got some tips and tricks here that I have seen various students use, that I encourage students to use, that are best practices across disciplines and across the internet. And so the first thing that I would suggest for you to do is to create a spreadsheet to keep track of your job applications. It is going to be really difficult to just kind of like keep your Google tabs open and make sure that you're keeping track of things that way. You're going to lose things. You're going to accidentally have all your tabs closed out. Keeping that spreadsheet and importing all of the important information onto it is going to be very beneficial for you, particularly around those deadlines. Things happen. We, edit and edit and edit again, and then want to do one more edit before we submit. Or suddenly there's a paper deadline for publication that sprung up on you faster than you anticipated. Making sure you're having that spreadsheet of jobs you want to apply to, even if you don't apply to them right away, will be really beneficial to kind of prioritize. This is the deadline for this job. I need to make sure that I do this work for that job application before this date. But there are 2 or 3 jobs due 3 days later. I can either front load all of that work, or I've got some time in between there. I can kind of put those off for a few days. That spreadsheet, I would incorporate, like I said, those deadlines, and also a link to the job description. For every job application you submit, you are going to want to tailor your documents just a little bit to ensure that you have shown you read the school's website, you are really thinking about how you would fit in with that school, not just telling them about yourself, but kind of painting that picture for them of why you are the perfect fit. So having that spreadsheet will be very important because you may not want to apply to a job you find right away, especially if it's going to take a tiny bit of time to do those tailored edits. Another really important tip, as I said earlier, get multiple rounds of feedbacks on all documents, not just getting feedback from multiple people, but making sure that you are looking at your document, making the edits suggested, giving it back to someone and looking at it again. There are so many opportunities for spelling mistakes or grammar mistakes to slip in there that you could, have the best document ever, but have a few mistakes and have people sitting there judging you for the mistakes rather than for the content you're sharing. Getting feedback from people inside and outside the department. Your advisor gives that research lens. We and the Writing Center as well can ensure that you are effectively communicating yourself to people who don't necessarily dive super deeply into your research. A very important thing to consider, both in the PhD as a whole and in this process, do not compare yourself to others. Everybody's going at their own pace. Everybody wants different things. Sometimes the structure of a PhD can just kind of lead to that competition, especially if it's a cohort that's particularly prone to want to go into faculty roles. You may find that you and all the people you're graduating with and people you've ran into at conferences before, all of you are going for the same 3 roles. If that happens, that is a competition for the role, but that does not mean that you are any less than anyone else if they get the jobs and you do not. A lot of time, it ultimately comes down to fit, both personality fit, research agenda fit, anything like that. And it really is going to be detrimental to your mental health if you're spending your time asking yourself why you're not submitting as many applications or moving as fast as other people, because you have your own situations and you have your own factors that you're helping to decide which jobs you're applying to. And because you've done the things you've done, that really is not affected by the things that other people have done. The very, very most important thing, the thing that I spend the most time with people on as we're going through and making sure we're trying to tailor these documents and get them right, do not lose sight of the university or department's mission. That is going to be the key factor to focusing your career documents, showing that you've thought about how you fit in for this specific role at this specific college in this specific department. You're going to be probably applying for a number of different jobs that have very similar job titles. They're going to be at different schools, but they are essentially the same role. You're applying to all of them because you need a job, right? But if you and everyone else who's graduating in the same year as you are all applying to those same jobs, the universities have their same pick of candidates. They need to see why you're seeing yourself there. You really have to kind of sell them on, I am the best fit for you and this department. And the way that you do that is by showing them that you've read the university mission and thought about how the things that you have been doing will further that department or university mission. And then the last thing, it does not feel like this when you're in the moment, but you do have to remember, interviewing is a two-way street. Obviously, you are graduating, you are looking for a job, you would be happy with any job. But at the end of the day, when you're accepting these roles, particularly for tenure track positions, you are committing to being in that department and that role, ideally for a very, very long time. But it can be really important to consider your own experiences and how you might feel within that department. So using job postings and interviews to gauge the culture of the department and making sure that it's a place you could actually see yourself not only existing, but thriving, giving you the space to do the research that you want to do, feeling like you are supported by your colleagues or the administration within the university. So within all of those tips and tricks, as we're thinking about moving into some of these career documents that would be required, I want to make sure that we are highlighting all of the major requirements that are needed to go into this academic job market search. So requirements will, again, vary a little bit by discipline. I do always encourage you to make sure you are talking to your PI about the specifics for your field. But typically you're going to need some of the following. Usually you'll need to have that terminal degree by the start of the next school year. You will need to have published. The amount of publications will probably depend on the specific field. Like I said, higher education, You do not need as many publications as you would if you were going into the medical field. You will need that CV. You will need academic documents, including an academic cover letter, personal statement, a teaching statement, a research statement, and then probably not DEI statements anymore, but for the moment, we've still got them on there. And then you're also going to need those 3 or so references. So as we move into these academic career documents, I do want to make sure that we break down the expectations of each of these at a very broad level. I would strongly encourage you to take this information as kind of an intro step. And then when you do start drafting these, work with your advisor, make appointments with us, and we can go through and support you a little bit more specifically. Again, I'm using general guidelines. For some fields, there may be exceptions, either a little bit higher amounts of pages that are allowed, fewer pages that are allowed. You do want to make sure that you are talking to someone field specific so they can give you the specific expectations for that field. So you will need somewhere between 2 and 5 career documents. You will always need the CV. You will pretty much always need the academic cover letter or some form of it, some kind of statement of purpose or personal statement. And then you will very likely need some combination of the other statements. It is important to always read what the job posting is asking for and make sure you submit those documents. If you do not submit those documents, they will not necessarily consider you as a candidate because they will have lots of other qualified candidates. So we need the CV, we need the academic cover letter. You will probably need teaching and research statements for most applications, and then probably not a DEI statement, but I've still included information on it. My words of wisdom for all documents, make sure it is short and sweet. Your goal is not to get the job with this document. Your goal is to get the interview. You are not going to be able to adequately sum up the entire 5+ years of work. Even in that CV, we're only putting in, the bare minimum amount that we can to make sure that we include all the things we've done, explain a little bit, but you're not putting every single paper you've published in the last 5 years onto that CV. You're only putting that citation. So we want to use all these documents to pique their interest, show a comprehensive overview of yourself, but make sure we're really still leaving it at that kind of overview stage. We're not going to be able to talk about the specific thing that you did for a specific student in a specific class on April 15th, right? We're thinking about broad overarching goals and approaches. Our goal is to aim for 1 to 2 pages for pretty much every document we have besides the CV. For certain fields, things like the academic cover letter can be up to 3 pages, but we still really are just giving a comprehensive overview of what we've done. So 2 pages is kind of the sweet spot for all of these documents. For a CV, you do not have the page limit, and you will ultimately decide on how long that is based on the things that you've done. The other thing that I encourage you to do is do your research. You want to make sure that you align how you're presenting your work with the things that are important to the university department specific role. The things that you have done haven't changed, but you can present them in different ways that are going to be effective to addressing the specific needs that are put forth in the job application. So this is what we call tailoring. If I wanted to do a primarily teaching professor role, I would present a lot of the things that I've done differently than if I wanted to do a faculty that was tenure track, really focused on research. I've still done all of the same things, but I want to make sure that I'm focusing more on the research that I've done for the tenure track position. And if I want to do a teaching position, I would need to focus more on any of the teaching or individual one-on-one student support. So the CV, that is our most important document. everyone probably has some version of this at this point in their PhD career. If you do not, we do help with building CVs as well, and I would encourage you to make an appointment. The purpose of a CV is to present yourself as a scholar or a scholar practitioner. There is no minimum or maximum length. Depending on how many publications you have, a fifth year CV is often between 3 and 6 pages. This is built off of, trends that I've seen over the last 2 years. Typically, they're about 5 pages for a fifth year student. If you have lots and lots of publications, I've seen people who are PhD students in their 4th year who have 12-page CVs. It really just kind of depends on what you've done and where you want to focus your presentation. A longer CV does not necessarily make a better CV. A shorter CV does not necessarily make a worse CV. You just want to make sure that you have presented all of the information that is necessary on that document. Typically, at bare minimum, I encourage people to incorporate your education, your experience, which is sometimes just research experience. Sometimes people split it up into research and teaching experience. You will have any publications, and then you will have any presentations. There are a lot of other opportunities that you have to incorporate other things on there, things like awards. But as long as you've got your education, your experiences, your publications, and your presentations, you have met the bare minimum requirements of a CV. So within this CV, there are also other opportunities to incorporate grants and fellowships, awards, volunteering or service, any technical skills, professional memberships. You've got a lot of space here to work with because there is no page limit. But typically, people will choose which one of these extras to put on based on what they have done and what they are trying to do. These often end up as your kind of service summary. I would always suggest starting with your education and then moving into your experience. As I said, some people split it up into research and teaching experience. Some people who had work experience before will have professional experience as an additional category. And then we've got our publications and presentations. One of the main issues that I see when looking at PhD CVs is that they use very, very technical language. They get very, very niche into things. And that is going to be very important to get niche, to get technical in any of the things that you are doing. You want to explain your research. You want to make sure people understand what you're doing. But sometimes you will find that you can't really explain what you did day to day super effectively with the high level concepts of the research projects you've been doing. If you find that that is an issue you are having where the research experiences get all tangled up because you want to talk about both your skills in using pipettes and your really, really high complicated thesis title, and you can't figure out a way to naturally bring up both of those, I would suggest considering what's called a project section, where you focus more on the actual work that you were doing on a day-to-day basis and those skills that you built in the research experience section, thinking about yourself a little bit more as a worker, and then focus on high-level, almost abstract of like 2 or 3 sentences, just summarizing the ideas that you were exploring within the specific projects. That is not something that is required, but I do find for a lot of students, they have trouble focusing on particular research experiences and research skills they've built because they want to talk about their projects. And this can be a nice way by splitting it up to kind of make sure you're getting both focuses. So we looked at the CV. You are not going to necessarily have a lot of sentences in your CVs. A lot of it will be lists. You may choose to incorporate bullet points like you would for a resume. It is not required. But both in the CV and any other academic job market documents we're going to talk about, you want to make sure that you are using this narrative first person voice. You're not being passive in any of this. You are saying, this is what I did. Particularly when we're looking at the academic job letter, the academic cover letter, we are going to want to refer to specific examples. Again, this is not necessarily, I said this thing to this student on this particular Tuesday, but it is, I had a conversation with a student once about this. It is not conceptually, this is how I would deal with something. You are actually pulling from a real experience to address how you have built some of those responses. And so using your CV as a kind of starting place for all the rest of the job market documents is going to be very beneficial for you so that you can refer back to, oh yeah, I had an experience in this research assistantship that I could talk about in an academic cover letter. Keeping it brief, very important. As we said, we want to have it for most things be maximum 2 pages unless otherwise told by someone in your field. And although it seems like DEI statements are moving out, we still do want to incorporate any diversity, equity, and inclusion that we incorporate into our own practice into all of these documents, whether or not the application itself requires a separate DEI statement. So I've talked a little bit about these academic cover letters already. The purpose of the academic cover letter is to give an overview to your research, teaching, and service. You also are going to want to address a little bit of the philosophies that you have around these. You want to address some experiences that you've had in the past that have built up your research, teaching, and service philosophy. And you really want to think about how that stuff that you've done in the past is preparing you to do the things you want to do in the future at that particular university. So this is really going to be where we bring in that tailoring. Your teaching philosophy may be the same across every place that you're in, but the way that it manifests, depending on the structure of the department, whether I would be put in my own higher education department, an educational administration department, or an education department as a whole, that might affect how I would plan to do my research and kind of what I would plan to focus on. So making sure you are giving that overview of yourself and also connecting it into how you would be a faculty member at this particular place in this particular department. These academic cover letters are 1 to 2 pages. As I said, some fields, they are 3, or they might end up being 3 pages if the job application indicates that research and teaching statements are not required. If they do not state page length and you do not have a 3-page academic cover letter as an expectation in your field, particularly fields I think like math have a 3-page expectation. If it's not something like that, stick with the 2 pages. It is always better to stick within the accepted typical page limit than to push those boundaries, because at the end of the day, the PhD is really just an apprenticeship into the field. And it is better to stick with those conventions than try and push it and show that you are not aware of the specific rules within the field. For an academic cover letter, I have linked here the resource that I pulled this from. This is also on our graduate school website, but this is a really good breakdown of how this academic cover letter should look. We want to make sure we are starting with an opening statement, kind of describing and introducing ourselves. We want to focus on the scientific achievements that we've had in the past. We want to talk a little bit about how we see our research moving in the future, including how it fits in with the specific university. We want to spend a tiny bit of time towards the end on teaching approaches and philosophies and any of that service that you've done in the past that would prepare you to do service in the faculty role, and then have a little bit of a conclusion of, because of all the things I've already said, here is why I would be a good fit working with this particular department. I know that you all focus on this, I think I would bring a really good perspective to the other research that's already been here, any of that kind of wrap up stuff, and then sign it off. It is not super complicated, but it can feel a little bit weird to, talk about yourself and your accomplishments this much. You do want to make sure that you are presenting yourself well and not shying away from any of those achievements that you have had. Those are going to be the things that really show the university and the faculty members in the hiring committee that other people trust your research abilities. And that is the main thing that they need to know in order to consider you as a viable candidate. So as you go through, build your own academic cover letter, I would strongly suggest checking out this resource and kind of looking a little bit more into the descriptions around each of these paragraphs and what would be expected in them. Within the overarching academic cover letter, we talk a little bit about our research, we talk a little bit about our teaching and service, and then we kind of summarize everything up. The academic cover letter is essentially an abstract to our teaching and research statements. The teaching statement gets more in depth into your teaching philosophies, practices, past experiences, and future plans, and it should be 1 to 2 pages. So pretty much all the things that you say in these 1 to 2 pages of your teaching statement get boiled down into one paragraph in the academic cover letter. The teaching statement can answer any of these questions, and I will share these slides afterwards if people are interested, so you can follow through on this specific resource. But general questions along the lines of, why do you teach the way you do? What should students expect of you as a teacher? What is a method of teaching you rely on? What do you want students to learn? Any of these can build up and show your teaching philosophy. And again, bringing in specific examples of, when I taught this class, this idea was challenged. Now I've come out with a slightly different idea. You don't have to go all the way into depth on it, but you do want to make sure you're using specific experiences from your past. Similarly, for a research statement, the purpose is to get more in depth into your research interests, necessary background skills that you've built, trajectory of your research, specific projects, guiding theories or methodologies, goals and motivations for your research, and future directions. These, again, ideally 1 to 2 pages. It should be an absolute maximum of 3. And I would only go into 3 if your faculty members who are looking at this are encouraging you to. I would keep it at 2 pages if at all possible. Just like the teaching statement, this is 1 to 2 pages that will then get narrowed down into 2 paragraphs within that academic cover letter. So this is the place to go more in depth, pull in more of those specific experiences, and then use the academic cover letter as just like a little bit of a way to summarize the larger picture you've shared here. The major concepts to address, main themes of your research and why it's important, summaries of a few previous projects, problems you've solved, and influences that those projects have had, and then again, this future direction of your research. So what is the main theme? These are a few of the projects showing the main theme, and here is the future direction. You can mention presentations, you can mention collaborations, you can include a brief history of concepts, anything that you think would be necessary to show that you've got this expertise to other people who also have the expertise. The research statement can answer any of the following questions here. What got you interested in the research? What was the burning question you set out to answer? How can your research be applied? Why is your research important within the field? Or what directions will your research take next? And what new questions do you have? So again, I have pulled these from this resource. I would encourage you, if you have more questions about that, to go check that out afterwards. DEI statement. DEI stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. The purpose would be to explain your commitment to promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion within your research, teaching, and service. and the length that would be 1 to 2 pages. I've got advice on where to start here, thinking about your own identities or values. But as I said, I don't know if these are still going to be required next year. And the major sections would just be defining your values, demonstrating your competencies, showing evidence, and thinking about future action. So with all of that, we did just a very quick crash course of the concepts of academic documents and kind of the overview of timelines and resources for you as you're going through this experience yourself. At this point, we are pretty much coming up on time. I do have a couple of minutes here while you all are still here to be able to address any questions that you have. But I will also be more than happy to stay afterwards and make sure that I connect you with any resources that you personally might need. Hello.
Hi, this is really helpful. Thank you. I was just wondering for utilizing like the graduate career development office to be able to review
Yes.
documents. Do we schedule appointments for that on your website?
Yeah,
Okay.
so typically it would be for you would go on to Handshake if you
Okay.
are you are you currently registered as a student?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, cool. I know we had a couple of postdocs here, but
Postdocs.
if
Yeah.
you are registered as a student, you should have a student account automatically. You go onto there, you scroll all the way to the very bottom where it says Career Centers. You just kind of click through until you see Make an Appointment, choose Grad Careers. If that is not an option, you email me and then I can make an appointment on my side because some people are not registered correctly.
Okay.
Um,
Awesome.
yeah, but you should be fine. And we do have, I know somebody here is asking about apps for postdocs. I support in anyone trying to get a job in their master's or PhD after they graduate here. So I personally would review any applications for people trying to become postdocs. We do have a postdoc office here that might be better for those specific people who are currently postdocs, and I will go ahead and pull up that information while in case anybody else has any other questions, I will wait for those questions while I pull up that information.
I have one other question, unless other people want to jump
Absolutely.
in. But are there what are your most recommended centralized resources for looking for academic jobs? I know LinkedIn and Handshake are both tools that I've seen available. Otherwise, I found too
Mhm.
that watching directly at university job postings can be helpful, but there's a billion
Mhm.
universities, so it can be hard to make sure you're getting all of them.
Yeah, so I would say I'm going to go ahead and share two resources that I personally use. They typically have both faculty positions and other positions like admin and things like that. Um, we do have pages on our website as well, but I would say that one's not. I'm going to share the one that does seem to be working because the other one is not working when I try and copy it over. Here we go. There in higher ed jobs and inside of higher ed are two very good places that kind of cover most of the things that might be happening within higher education roles. And then just within our office itself, we've got a few more resources here that if I was slightly more organized, I would be better at finding.
You're good. Thank you so much.
And your support. Here you go. So this would be our website, the Graduate School Office of Graduate Career Development. We've got some of the ones that I suggested to you are here on this list. There are a couple other ones that are also here, and then there are a few that might be suggested by discipline. And I would say if you are in a specific discipline and within a professional association within that discipline, that would be a very, very good place to find some of those positions.
Awesome. Thank you.
Do I have anyone else who has any questions? Okay, so I will after this try and make sure that this presentation gets onto our website as quickly as possible. I will also try and send out any of these slides to people who were here today, so you can have some of the links. I have also shared my email here in the chat in case you have any follow-up questions. But you should be able to find any of my contact info on the Office of Graduate Career Development's website. Okay, thank you all.